Arthur Schmidt has a career in editing that spans over 4 decades, from the 70s to the early 2000s. He is responsible for editing some of the most iconic films in the 80s and 90s, such as the Back to the Future trilogy, Forrest Gump, and the first installment of Pirates of the Caribbean, as well as many others.
Oh, please, you're insane. Oh, gems! He's got rare gems in the safe! Oh, Sam, forgive me! What? Yes!
As a consequence for his editing work, Schmidt has won 2 Oscars for Forrest Gump and Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and has been nominated for many BAFTAs. In an interview with Schmidt done in 2014, it was said what Schmidt thought about editing action sequences.
This is absolutely brilliant. What was interesting when I had lunch with Arthur a few weeks ago, we talked about, what does he like to cut? And action, he says, cutting action's easy. Cutting dialogue is hard.
This is shown in his work because, as well as Schmidt finding action sequences easy to edit, we, as the audience, find his action sequences easy to watch. Back to the Future, for example, has some of the most famous action sequences and chases, which were replicated in the second and third parts because of how well it was shot and edited in the first part. Schmidt, with his lifelong directing partner Robert Zemeckis, had a way of shooting and editing the action sequences that made them flow naturally, technically and narratively. They also had a tendency to mainly focus on their main characters within the action sequences and only cutting to other shots now and again when it was necessary. This is shown in the chase sequence in Back to the Future and the running sequence in Forrest Gump. In the Back to the Future sequence, where Biff and his gang are chasing Marty, the shots go from Biff and his friends to Marty continuously to show their reactions and where they are in the location. There are also close-up shots of Marty's feet on the skateboard, as well as other characters' reactions to Marty, such as his mother's. The close-up shots of Marty, Biff and the skateboard adds tension and suspense to the action. The long shots of Biff chasing Marty makes it easy for the audience to know where the characters are and see the action that's happening. The shot of the young boys is to show their admiration for the main characters, and to also switch up the monotonous shots of Marty and Biff. These same sequence of shots are shown in Forrest Gump, where young Forrest runs away from his bullies. The same back and forth shots of Forrest and his bullies apply, as well as the close-up shots of Forrest's legs as the metal on his legs break off as he runs. This type of editing from Schmidt is even shown in The Jericho Mile, a TV film made in 1979 about a man in prison who competes in a running competition. Although the film was one of his earlier works and was shot by a different director, we still see a similar pattern that Schmidt edits in. In one of the running scenes, there are mainly shots of the main character Larry running, as well as some cuts of his inmates' reactions to the race as more start to watch and support him. However, the main differences from this scene in The Jericho Mile compared to his later work are the transitions between shots and the slow motion action. The transitions between the different shots of Larry running, such as going from a mid-shot to a long shot, are cross dissolves, which shows that time is continuously passing between shots as Larry runs. However, in his latest work, Schmidt only uses cuts to make the action quicker and more tense. The transitions and slow motion action that Schmidt has used on the running shots takes attention away from how fast Larry is running and turns it more into a spectacle and makes the audience anticipate that Larry is going to get the fastest time. 4 decades later, in 2003, Schmidt still has a similar editing style as action sequences in Pirates of the Caribbean and The Curse of the Black Pearl. However, there are more significant characters in Pirates of the Caribbean than there are in Schmidt's previous work. This means that Schmidt has divided the shots spent on each character fairly equally, showing what is happening with Jack Sparrow, Will Turner, Elizabeth Swann, and the villain Hector Barbosa. There are also shots of the rest of the crew fighting, as well as the Navy when they're invading the ship. Comparing this sequence to the second installment in the franchise made in 2006, that was edited by Stephen Rifkin rather than Schmidt, there is a difference in screen time spent on the characters. Most of the action scene where Jack Sparrow is fighting Davy Jones is focused on them, and there are only a few shots of the other characters like Will Turner. There is also more of a spectacle in this sequence than the one that Schmidt edited, due to the extreme long shots of Jack Sparrow as he swings around the ship. Another big difference is the colouring in the sequences. While Schmidt's was natural and looked realistic, Rifkin's was more washed out and had a greenish tone that creates more of a fantasy and unworldly look to it.